thing though.
Actually, I did once. It was pretty good.
Beginning to bring oil or something. I always use olive oil.
The only time I did it was way last. It was right just after we first bought it. And I was at home, so I was sick or something, so I think it was the time I had COVID.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago. I haven't done it lately.
Make sure to get the Chevy.
Whatever, yeah.
Because we have improved, this is in the microphone.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably better than it was.
Yes.
Because our drill team wants to do comments on that. Our drill team, yeah, and Walters.
Welcome, everyone. I'm now going to call to order the special planning committee meeting of Thursday, March 23rd. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and in particular our near neighbors, the Chiana First Nation and also the Sauk First Nation. So our focus this afternoon is to reintroduce a rezoning application from Lita Homes for 4696 Beckingham Road. So this is a 99 acre or 40 hectare parcel, and it's located just off Kangaroo Road. It is currently zoned rural, which does allow for 4.5, just under 5 acre subdivisions. And I mention that just to keep that in mind, that the property owner can subdivide this land per our current land use bylaw and the provisions currently found in our official community plan, and in keeping with all provincial regulations, including riparian regulations. So what the developer has brought back to this committee from their first appearance in May 2022 is a new proposal that may bring benefits to the community and to the environment. However, actualizing these potential benefits will come with some complexities, such as the potential of a rezoning and an amendment to our OCP. And in the context of Machosen's rural character, these are significant matters. So this afternoon, we'll continue the discussion on the best course ahead. So the order of progression for our meeting is as follows. We will open the door to hear from residents during public participation. We'll then hear from Catherine Lysician, the district's planner. She'll take us through the application and the options that she has presented to the committee for its consideration. We'll then hear from the developers and their team, and there'll be questions from the committee, and time allowing questions from residents. And the committee will then consider the proposal and the recommendations. Before I get to the approval of the agenda, I just want to welcome our guests. So Dave Stevens of Lita Homes is here with Denise Kors, what seems to be his chief consultant. Josh Bartley is also a consultant, and Lena Mumkevist is the environmental lead, I think. So with that, move to the first formality of just committee. Is there any change to the agenda?
Move agenda?
Okay, and all in favor? Thank you very much. And next, we will move to public participation, and per our normal public participation, you have 4 minutes. Anybody for public participation, please. And Chris, if you could say your name and street you want. Thank you very much.
Chris Moore, 4545 William Head Road. I'm obviously here to speak to the application that's in front of you. Before I begin, I'd like to make it absolutely clear, and please record that I'm speaking on behalf of myself alone. There are 2 reasons for this. First, the executive APRM are taking a much needed sabbatical following the last 2 weeks. And secondly, even if we could have convened, my suspicion is that we would not likely have reached a consensus with respect to this development as proposed. Before I elaborate further, I would like to say there's been a long time since I have viewed a staff report planning document as comprehensive, considerate, and as well laid out as this one, and I'd like to compliment our planner on that. On a personal note, I would say that I would like to state that with respect to this proposal, I've been straddling two horses, torn between option 2 and 3, and it is, quite frankly, somewhat uncomfortable. As you know, option 3, as recommended, is essentially status quo. This proposal proceeds consistent with our current zoning, as Jay has pointed out. There are a few pluses. No change requirements to our OCP that I'm aware of. No requirement for a public hearing. No delayed startup for the proponent. And apparently it can be accomplished with the installation of private wells, described as, quote, feasible by the hydrologist report. So on the surface, relatively simple. Now the counter to that, from what I've heard, is in many people's minds, and counter to the professional hydrologist report, additional wells could pose a risk to Aquifer 606, which I think you're well aware. At this point in time, I suggest there is no real definitive answer to that. I would also like to add that Metchosin is no stranger to bringing in piped water to previous well sites. For example, we had the Zodiac subdivision and more recently Arden Road when the existing wells failed. And the important bit here is that Metchosin accomplished this twice at absolutely no cost to your resident taxpayers. Jerry Malott in those days made very sure of that. It was paid over an extended period of time by the impacted residents. I think they took 10 years or something, who were very happy to do so. With regards to option 2, this scenario, as you know, requests the addition of 4 more residential lots, which I can only guess, but I suggest it has a likely land value of somewhere around $500,000 apiece. That would likely cover off much of the needed infrastructure for piped-in water. Maybe not. What it would certainly do is to raise the value of the 24 lots in question. I don't have any problem with folks feathering their nests. We all do that. But it appears that given the administrative overhead that would be required on the part of the district to pursue this option, I suggest that the proponents will be well served to compensate Metchosin in some real way, other than just paying the rent for a public meeting. What I mean by that is real compensation.
Sorry, Chris, I have to ask you to, I will step through each of those things.
And associated expenses. The last considered development in Metchosin I'm aware of took place in the Deer Park development, possibly way before your time, under a contractual agreement with Don Mann and Company. What one is hoping for here is that same natural areas consideration and sensitivity will prevail at Beckingham Road. But there are reasons to suspect that might be the case. Okay, but as we all know, Metchosin's enforcement and follow-up over time has often been less than stellar. Just to put there. 3 days ago, and I'm happy to see it's in it's been pinged. I received a communication from the Metchosin Foundation, penned by Morgan Yates, outlining a strategy that offers the foundation's support
Chris, you have 30 seconds more.
in a stewardship role for the oversight of the natural areas of Beckingham Road. As we know, the foundation has been highly effective in challenging land use issues, e.g. the Girls and Boys Club lands. In their documents, they've identified a number of caveats that should be included in your deliberations. And upon review, my thoughts that all of these supporting caveats mentioned should be pursued and enforced. And no doubt our planner would add perhaps one or two more. So here's an opportunity to forge a beneficial relationship with the foundation with respect to this development. And,
Chris, thank you very much.
one
Sorry, you're
sentence.
well over your
As
4
in
minutes.
all land issues, it's not so much what you do, but how you do it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else for public participation?
Oh, you bet.
Thanks, Kim. Your name and street you're on, and you have 4 minutes.
Kim
Thanks very
Hill,
much.
1070 Brookview Drive, the chosen citizen. All right. It's right off the top. I looked at the reporting, all very interesting. I agree with Chris. Well done, staff. First of all, I just know I am absolutely firmly against any idea that changes the OCP in this district. At the last review, and especially as it applies to the idea of piping in water, at the last OCP review, my mind was changed about this matter. I was for piped water. I heard from this community, for very good reasons, why that is a bad idea. It's a thin edge of the wedge, and I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts of that, but we are known for taking a unique stand here about land use decisions. It's made clear in the OCP that we put the capability of our land first. It's not about increasing density, that's not the job of the chosen. The chosen's job, according to the OCP, is we do things differently. Thank goodness we are admired for that. We look at the land and see what it can handle. Okay. Now, and further to that, the capability of land. The land up there, it's zoned. Sure, under the OCPC, it says there, it can be subdivided as provided that the lots can be serviced with well water. The proponent knew this. He knew full well when he bought that property, or he or she, whatever it is. That's a rule. It's no surprise. Expecting an automatic approval of a 20-lot subdivision, well, that's not a right that came with land. That's a speculative move. Further to that, the loan report, the hydrological report, that's not a guarantee that those places can be serviced. 20 lots can be serviced. Far from it. The loan report, that's a good company. I trust them. But you read that report, all through it, it says, based on old information, do not put your money on this. And they have certainly made it very clear in their last paragraph, they're not going to guarantee it, and neither should the chosen. The modern way that we do things with wells is you dig the hole, test it, and see if you get results. That's especially in Aquifer 606. Things are in flux there. Things are very likely to have changed. Okay. Now, the trouble with that too is, you accept that report. Guess who the lot owners are going to track at? The chosen. We're going to be held liable if that's not appropriate. It could be very true that that land may not be capable of accepting 20 new wells. Perhaps it is for a lesser number. I have no idea. You've got to drill a hole, figure it out. Now, let's go. I'll string back. It's not the obligation of the chosen to enable delivery of monetary gains to those who speculate on land in the chosen. But it's very clear to anybody who buys land here, they are under conditions that are unique to the chosen. That's why we are such a desirable place. And that's why those lots, they could subdivide half the number, a third of the number up there, and still recoup a giant gain. So I don't want you to be facilitating something that causes us future problems. I say keep it simple, keep it straightforward, obey the OCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Can I ask a question on this, Hill?
Christie?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? So you're opposed to pipe water. Can you just flesh that out just briefly of the environmental damage? I imagine getting it there, but
It's
what?
not so much that, it's the policy and philosophy of the OCP. As I said, my mind was changed after conversations with people in this community who've got a more wholesome view of this. You put in pipe water, okay, full disclosure. I live in an area up here, pipe water, 2.5 acres. It worked out fine when they did that little subdivision back in the 70s. But when it continued on up into High Mount, where actually we can't blame Langford for all of our problems. High Mount is also there's problems being generated up there because they put 2.5 acre lots in an inappropriate part of the landscape. And we've got examples of it. You put the water in, the next door neighbors are going to want that, and pretty soon people are not going to be they're not going to be using the wells. Aqua 606 will be put in the past. Oh, that was a fun thing we had in the past. It's just like putting hatchery fish into a water system that you've wrecked the natural wild fish. We don't have hatchery fish in here. We've got wild fish because of our attitude. We do things for nature's rules, and it is the best way to go. And we are admired. People want to be here. My customers come down here for Langford. They're completely jealous. And I'm sorry that they cannot, that's because we don't ask the land to do more than it's capable of. It's unique. I want it to stay that way. Okay?
Thanks very much, Kim.
Okay.
Great. Anyone else for public participation? Your name and street, please, and you have 4 minutes. Thanks.
Nicole Shukin, Levon Road resident. I don't really have prepared comments. I just want to, I really appreciate the fact that we have an opportunity to consider the amenity rezoning, but I actually agree with Kim on many points here. I feel that the well data, the well logs, or the well reports are just so out of date that it wouldn't be possible to make an informed decision based on that data. So one thing council might be interested in doing is requesting updated well reports to see whether in fact the land, the water is there to support subdivisions, this kind of subdivision. And this is especially so because like when you're considering amending the OCP, if you don't have data like to merit opening consideration of that OCP amendment, that seems kind of thin on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Anyone else for public
Change of
participation?
pace, change of pace. Okay, I'm wildly excited about this subdivision, and I hope it's a model. Bev Bacon, a chosen resident, and I hope that this is an ecological model that other developers will take on. It's totally sensitive to the environment. How could we say no to 40 acres of natural land that is now rich habitat and biodiversity and is supporting our wetlands and our creek? And so I've written you a letter. I hope you've read it and memorized it. And I wrote you another letter before that, and I spoke once before. Today I brought you 10 points. And you'll recognize me as a former primary school teacher because I'm going to give it to you, and you can make your notes right on the points. And what I'm hoping to see is check marks and happy faces. And you say, that makes sense. So this is boiling it down to how I see it and how I would love every subdivision that comes before us to look like this. Caveat, we're not going to give them 4 extra lots. Okay, number 1. I strongly support setting aside 40-acre nature reserve, and it doesn't matter to me if it's a designated park or just a conservation area. A trail through to the Galloping Goose, this is number 2. A trail through to the Galloping Goose is desirable, and it's being offered, I believe. Number 3, the environmental report suggests that Lot 20 is best left as part of the undeveloped area. Considering that some of the area to be developed will be roadway, this might end up being a 19-lot subdivision, and they're still going to do very well. Number 4, I believe that there is strong public support for piped water. And I'm just so surprised to hear arguments against it. Let's take the stress off our aquifer. And our wells, the wells are going to become more iffy with climate change and drought. And going forward, if we can get people on pipe water, that doesn't bring more subdivision and more people coming in. We don't want sewer, but pipe water is a good thing. And so number 5, I agree with Morgan Yates that a third-party negotiator be involved in helping the developer present a lot plan that will gain public support. So this needs tweaking. But it's a very good start, and we need somebody negotiating with the developer to get something that the public will like. Number 6, I believe there is a mechanism for providing an incentive for the developer to create an ecologically sensitive community, but I don't think 4 bonus lots will meet with public approval. Number 7, I believe that the cost to the developer of bringing in piped water is offset by other savings. The job of the third-party negotiator would be to look at the cost benefits with the developer. So we're asking to sharpen the pencil here. There's money saved with the roads you don't build. There's money gained because the lots are more valuable and more sought after because of the piped water, and on and on. So I don't, number 8, and here, and we have a new planner, and I read in this that we should do it this way because this takes the least staff time. I don't think that should be a consideration. Let's do it right. And if we need to hire more staff time, that will be money well spent. So I don't think ease of getting the job done should be a rationale for accepting a plan that's suboptimal. We have turned off other developers that might have gone with amenity development. They might have gone with ecologically sensitive development, but we made it complicated and time-consuming, and they said, oh, what the heck, I'll just make my 10-acre lots or my 5-acre lots, and then I don't have to go through all these hoops. We should be bending over backwards for a developer that is willing to do a sensitive ecological development. And that kind of a development is going to attract the kind of people we want in Machosen. They will buy there because it is a sensitive ecological development, and they'll feel good about that community. Number 9, so I already said that if we need to engage more staff time,
4 minutes.
yeah, that will be money well spent. And this is number 10. This is 100 acres of prime habitat and biodiversity in the middle of Machosen. I've been waiting for this. Let's get it right, and thereby signal to other developers that when you try to accommodate to Machosen's values and priorities, the district does everything in its power to make it work. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Anyone else for public participation? Thanks, John. Your name and street you're on.
Joan Rosenberg, Kangaroo Road. I read over all the material today, so I'm pretty new to this, although I've known Beckingham and the property very well because it's connected to my property, not legally, but by trails. And I want to say that, of course, my preference would be no one ever touches it, but that's unlikely to be the future of the property. So when I consider what I would like to see, given that it probably will be developed, my fantasy would be 60 acres put aside and 2-acre lots, smaller lots, and go for more that's protected. But if we're not going to get that, I say that waterway and surrounding area having at least 40 acres protected is something that we should make available to the developer within our terms. It's very hard to procure land right now in Machosen. It's very hard to find any land available for protection. And so this is an opportunity. And I want to point out that the Uplands Planning Committee that I was on about 20 years ago said to developers, guess what? If you cluster your properties and give us, Machosen, some land, we will allow you to decrease the size of your properties to decrease your costs in development. As far as I know, no one has ever taken us up on the offer, and we've ended up losing beautiful pieces of property because it isn't incentive enough for developers. So although I hate the idea of allowing increased density, I think that we're really on the fence here. We're not getting any more land saved in Metchosin. And so we want to figure out a way to do it. And so I'm for us going forward and not having 25-acre lots back there. So we have to compromise, and hopefully they'll compromise.
Thank you, Joan. Lisa?
Lisa Gee, Kangaroo Road. Joan Rosenberg really summed up my thoughts as well. It'd be great if it stayed untouched, or if we had a larger area. That said, of course, development is going to happen, so I've written a letter, but would like to add my voice that piped water is the way to go. I don't know the reasons against piped water, but if this is going to happen, the aquifer, I am quite certain, cannot tolerate anymore, like not even one or two developments on it. Not just for today, but it seems to me when I'm looking through these reports that they're talking about, even if the aquifer, if the wells were tested today and the drilling was done today and it's producing maybe just enough water today, it's not taking into consideration 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road, these people are going to be living here. They need their water in the future, and that's not something that's tested for. And we know for a fact across the world there's just not enough water, and certainly not up from our aquifers. Our aquifers are decreasing. We've seen that on our own property. We've seen that in surrounding properties. But we're already making a tremendous effort to use rain barrels to do everything that we can so that we can produce our own food and yet not take from the aquifer. So my big request is, if this is going to happen, piped water. And then a couple of other requests, which is to also look at the letter in terms of the stress on the roads and perk testing. I didn't see anything about perk testing and what's going to happen with the stormwater, all that type of thing, with the disturbance to the land. How's that going to affect the people below, being that this is high up on a hill? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Dan?
Dan O'Connell, Kangaroo Road. So this is not an opinion about the subdivision at all. I just wanted to say we've lived there for 33, 34 years, and I remember going around with Don Metcalf, the guy that owned it, and he wanted $1 million 30 years ago, and I thought, oh, I wish I had $1 million. And now I regret that I didn't mortgage my place and couldn't have got it anyways. But anyhow, just to say that that piece, we have constant owl traffic that come to our place all fall. Like, it's crazy the amount of wildlife that's flowing out of there. We've had sheep that we lease, and for 7 years in a row we had cougar and bear kill. Like, it's a big game corridor. They move through there. I'm sure the Buchanans hate it in some way because they move with impunity. I've run through there many times, but this is a big enough piece that it allows for kind of the original landscape to produce and sustain big and small game birds, whatever. So it's because the other places have been developed and they're kind of concentrated, and there's a couple 100 acres. If you look, there's another 100 beside it. So we're losing something, which is regretful, but humans need to be addressed first. I'm putting that out there to say that it's not just another second growth forest that's a bit dry and, full of logging roads. It actually is a place that sustains a lot of biodiversity. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Anyone else for public participation? Kathy?
Kathy Atherton, Levon Road. Yeah, I have been here for 34 years, and in that time I have watched that area there and crossed my fingers that we would get a good offer for development for that area. And I think to use amenity zoning for it would be absolutely fabulous. Now, there was a comment made that amenity zoning has not been made use of before in the district because it's too onerous. And actually, Don Mann did Deer Park Trail with it, and with that we got a lovely 40-acre section spanning between the top of Deer Park and Arden Road that is very well used and loved all the time by lots of hikers and walkers, and is also, as Dan was saying, you go through there and you hear the owls and you see the evidence of cougars and everything that been through there. It's just a gem. And Dawn actually got recognition from some, I can't remember which ones, but some organizations recognizing what a contribution he'd made to the ecology of the area and to Victoria. As far as the water issue goes, if you look back historically, Arden Road subdivision and Aquarius went to incredible lengths to get piped water put in because they didn't have good water supply. Levon Liberty has very iffy water. We have to accept that in our area, we don't have a great water supply. There were 12 wells. One was a real outlier with 50 gallons per minute. If you took that one out of the equation, you dropped your average output from 9 gallons down to 5 gallons. And that was based on old evidence. So who knows what the wells are actually producing at this point now. So yeah, I would be a proponent for piped water. Not just for the preservation of the aquifer, but also because one of the things that we keep hearing over and over again, Metchosin's biggest threat is fire. It's not earthquake, it's not really development, it's actually fire. And if you have city water in there, you have a much better source of being able to combat any fire that originates in that area. And you just have to look at the fire up on Mount Blinkhorn a number of years ago. If we hadn't had the access of the water bombers there, that could have gone very differently. So anyway, for my 2 cents worth, I would love to see this proposal given really good consideration. I agree 4 extra lots seems to be excessive. Hopefully there can be some negotiations reached, but I would love to see everybody really work together to try and make this happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And anyone else for public participation? And I'd say going once, twice, and we will now move on then in the agenda. Thanks everyone for your comments, and I do want to recognize that we have had correspondence from other people. Kathy Saluk, Morgan Yates aren't here, Sasha Kubicek aren't here, but also letters from Kathy, Bev, and Lisa were provided. And so with that, I'm going to turn things now over to Catherine for a walk through the options and the proposal and the options that she has provided for us. Okay.
Thank you for that. Good afternoon to the Planning Committee and members of the public. Today I'm going to present you with an application that's been brought forward by the owners of 4696 Beckingham Road. This property originally came before the previous council in May of 2022, where the applicant was directed to do a more thorough analysis of the environmental value of the property, and questions were posed around the viability of bringing CRD water to the property in order to protect the aquifer. The applicant has done just that and brings forward an alternative proposal for the Planning Committee's consideration. You'll have seen at the back of my report that there is an attachment of the report from May 2022 to provide you with that background. Okay, so getting into the basics about the application, 4696 Beckingham Road is approximately 100 acres in size. This would allow for the creation of 20 lots under the current zoning of RU2. It's important to note that the applicant can proceed with 25-acre lots regardless of this attempt at a rezoning application. Our OCP, however, offers an alternative, an amenity zoning, which allows a developer to make an application to rezone in order to allow the same number of lots, but the idea is that at least 25% of the property be dedicated as open space. The minimum lot size is reduced to 2 acres, and the lots would be clustered on a portion of the property rather than spread out through the entire property. All right. So this is the current concept plan. It involves 24 lots, 4 more than what's currently permitted. The additional lots are proposed in order to offset the anticipated costs of bringing CRD water to the property. The other big difference with this new proposal is that a new environmental overview was completed with a registered professional biologist, and a new approach to the site design has been taken. The proposed layout generally tries to avoid the environmentally sensitive areas on the property, and it includes clustered development. And where there are ESAs or environmentally sensitive areas within lots, there are additional measures recommended for protection of those ESAs within parcels. By proposing to increase the number of residential lots, the applicant does not qualify to make an application for an amenity development because there can be no increase in density or number of lots as per the OCP. The increased density proposed is also out of alignment with policy 400.30, which generally does not support applications for increasing residential units, with the caveat that all applications will be considered by council on their own merits. So I'm going to run through the legislative and policy context that council should be aware of as you navigate this proposal. First of all, please note that under the Local Government Act, council is obligated to consider every application for changes in land use. Secondly, applications need to conform to the OCP. In this case, the 24 lot proposal does not align with the OCP, and therefore an OCP amendment is required. Thirdly, council has a policy regarding rezoning applications, that policy 400.30, that states that applications which involve a proposed increase in density are contrary to that policy and are therefore normally refused. However, council must review the merits of all the applications as per the Local Government Act. The owner has been made aware of this policy and has requested to proceed on the merits of their application. Finally, any proposed changes to the text of the official community plan, if that happens, must also align with our regional context statement and the regional growth strategy, particularly as it relates to growth management and infrastructure provision. So we need to keep that layer of policy in mind as we go forward. So on to water extension and servicing. The applicant has supplied a well water feasibility report from a hydrogeologist. This report, which is attached, states that 20 wells are feasible. Wells could be used as an amenity development using cluster development, meaning that meaning an amenity rezoning, or for the subdivision application, which the applicant is already eligible to apply for. Concern has been voiced in the community about the long-term viability of the aquifer, which is why this discussion is happening as part of this application. Overall, there is general support for water connection within Metchosin, within the OCP, but it's not mandatory. Well water is an acceptable form of servicing as part of subdivision approvals. The OCP promotes responsible extension of water services and suggests the creation of a water strategy to determine the quantity and quality of water sources and to assess the impact of development on existing water sources. Unfortunately, we don't have this strategy in place, so the district is relying on the professional reports indicating that appropriate water supply is available. A preliminary cost estimate to bring piped water to the site, a distance of over 1 kilometer, is approximately $3 million. Moving on to the environmental considerations, the applicant has supplied the district with that environmental overview. The property contains second growth forest, rocky outcrop streams, and wetlands. There's an existing house on the southeast corner of the property, and it's crisscrossed by existing logging roads. The property is home to Hewitt Creek and some relatively steep terrain. The report has confirmed the presence of sensitive ecosystems and riparian habitat. No protected nests or critical habitat were observed, but the property does provide extensive valuable habitat for all sorts of animals. The report provides the basis for an environmental lot layout, including identification of developable areas, protected areas, and more. 40% of the property is proposed as a park or open space. Trails are being proposed in the open space areas, and the roads proposed generally follow the existing road layout to minimize site disturbance. So the options presented, I wasn't going to go through all of the options in detail because I provided that detailed analysis within the report, but I boiled them down to 4 options for council's consideration. Each have pros and cons. The first 2 options involve additional community discussions outside of the regular application process. For the first one, due to broad amendments to the OCP in that amenity development section, and the second with policy 400.30. Option 3 involves a rezoning and an OCP mapping edit, basically making them align, and is in alignment with the OCP and other policies. Option 4 involves denying the application altogether, which results in the owner making a conventional 20-lot subdivision. So the rationale for this, I wanted to provide a little bit of clarity around the recommendation before council today, or the committee. The main rationale for my recommendation is that the current proposal of 24 lots is out of alignment with the OCP as well as the policy. I think that the improved environmental information and layout can easily be adapted to a 20-lot layout to meet all of council's and the community's objectives as outlined in the OCP. In addition, the hydrology report, which we must rely on in the absence of a water strategy, states that wells in this location are feasible. I'm not shying away from the discussion regarding concerns about water or growth management. Both are important items for Metchosin to discuss and update over time. My caution is with proceeding with these conversations linked to an application rather than conducting a larger community conversation about these topics and perhaps some other topic areas at the same time. It's quite possible that these conversations will create significant debate and could result in unanticipated and unplanned costs for the municipality for this year. And I do think that if council would like to conduct these conversations with the community, that it's done on council's timeline and with the appropriate budget contingencies, please, in place, sorry. So my staff recommendation is to go with option 3. You're welcome to debate the merits of that. We'd like to direct the committee to direct council to work with staff, with the applicant to proceed with an amenity zoning and OCP designation amendment in accordance with the policy and in compliance with the OCP. We would like council's confirmation that there's agreement that significant amenity value exists on the land. We'd like to advise the applicant that they can proceed with public input meeting for the 20-lot amenity development. And we'd like to refer the amendments out to internal and external agencies for comment before we come back to committee for discussion about that. So that concludes my report. I believe the applicants are prepared to make a brief presentation as well. And we can address the questions maybe after they make their presentation. Yeah.
Committee, is that okay, or do you want to ask Catherine further questions? I do have a few for Catherine, but maybe it's better to hear from the proponents first. Mm-hmm. Sure. Whatever. Okay. Great. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks very much, Denise. The mic is all yours.
Thank you. So, good evening to the chair and members of the committee. My name is Denise Kors of Kors Development Services. The owner, Lita Holmes, has asked me to assist with this presentation tonight, and the intent of this presentation is to provide information on the existing subdivision potential under the existing zoning, as well as the options for and benefits of the amenity zoning under both water extension and well servicing concepts. So I'll begin by taking a look with you at the site information that's available. This plan shows the location of the approximately 100-acre lot as well as the water bodies. So the official community plan designation is rural, as well as the zoning that's currently on the property right now. And the owner could have moved forward with this application without coming to council under the existing zoning and with 5-acre lots. However, there are a number of riparian areas on and through the property, and also sensitive ecosystems have been identified in further study. So at this point in time, we are proceeding with moving forward with an amenity zoning application. This is cluster development is a very powerful tool that is used by planners and those who are associated with it, because it allows the same density to occur on a much smaller area of land, and just by its merits alone, this reduces the impacted areas, provides opportunities for better sensitive areas to be protected, and also provides the potential, if there are public lands, for the future recreational use of those lands. And so those are all good reasons to be considering this, so we appreciate the opportunity to have amended our application to look at that. So now talk a little bit about our initial design that we brought forward last May. So you can see it's quite a different configuration. This was very early in the process, based on not a lot of background information at the time that we brought it to the committee. And at that time we heard a number of things. We heard that there was a need for a more robust site investigation and broader inventory for the environmental identifications. The need to evaluate a new option to increase the potential maximum number of lots from 20 to make the water feasibility, to consider stormwater features for the lots, to ensure that the amenity zoning would document the recreational and the environmental values of the property, and to consider in the future that there would be an opportunity for council members to visit the site, and also to do further outreach to the public open house to present any future iterations for review and comment. So at this time, we're coming back almost 10 months later with this additional information provided. So the comments that we received and how we responded to those, which I've just gone over here, we now have much more detailed environmental overview, conceptual design and cost estimates for the new option. Providing piped water was considered and evaluated, and we have also given some further consideration to the stormwater management features that should accompany this development, and revised layout to address servicing and appropriate protection areas. And then earlier this year, we did review this revised proposal with staff. Here, I just want to pause for a minute and just be really clear that the idea of extending the water came from the previous planning committee. We were asked to look at this, and we've done so. It's not, from our perspective, it's a cost-neutral proposal that we're coming forward with the additional lots that we're requesting. Either way, wells or water extension, there is the potential that we can move forward. So the next few slides are going to go side by side by each of those areas. We'll start out by the environmental assessment. So in this case, we had riparian assessments done for the streams and wetlands, including identifying all the required setbacks, which was done by Lena Malmquist. We also had the sensitive ecosystems and rare species were evaluated by Thomas Munson on the team. The bird survey was completed by Ann Nightingale, and the wildlife and wildlife habitat assessments were done by Sean Mitchell.
sensitive terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem areas were then identified and put on the plans, and additional recommendations have been given in that report that would apply to the permitting and pre-construction and the construction stages of the project, which would still come. So we're not just looking at this moment in time, but following it right through to the completion of the subdivision. So the process that we followed was to take that information, map it onto the plans, and then take a look at the revised lot layout and identify appropriate amenity lands. So it was sort of starting with the environmental assessment to begin with, to make sure that what we were coming up with following that made sense. Following that, now I've got a couple of slides. The first one is related to the original proposal for the 20-lot subdivision with wells. And so just a few bullets related to what was submitted. A detailed hydrology assessment was done for the 20-lot option. Based on that, the hydrologist indicated that the minimum required capacity of 3,400 liters per day per lot was available. He then went on to describe a little bit more about the aquifer itself, Aquifer 606, saying that it's underlain by a productive bedrock aquifer and a proven long-term yield capacity in most areas. Identified the minimum setback areas for the final well locations. So in other words, are we able to give good well separation within this subdivision and others with the proposed layout that we have? And a minimum separation distance of 50 meters between those wells would be adequate. And finally, there were some standard recommendations associated with filtration and disinfection for the future use of the wells by the property owners. So now if we look at the water main extension options, so in this case, we were instructed or requested by the previous committee to take a look at what it would take to extend the water. And the scope of work that this would include would be not only the extension of about 1 kilometer from the current stub of the water main at Kangaroo Road and Moreland, but also all of the on-site infrastructure would also then be required to provide each of the lots with servicing and mains in the roads below. So for the off-site work, it would be, as I said, approximately 1 kilometer of extension. And on the on-site work, the subdivision servicing, which includes things like mains, in this case, because of the elevation of the land, a booster station would be required. And then, of course, all the fittings associated with individual servicing for the lots. And we did confirm with the CRD that this was a feasible application to make, which was an important thing to establish. So the estimated cost came in around $3 million. The increased project schedule is also a consideration here. To do a construction project like this will add quite a substantial amount of time by the time you have the design submitted to the regulatory agencies and the design plans putting out to contract and having contractors extend the work. It does add quite a bit of additional time. So we are cognizant of those things and just want to bring those forward today. And so the increased lot yield from 20 to 24 lots was being put forward. Again, this was a concept that was brought by a member of the previous council or planning committee who said it might be worth evaluating whether additional lots might be helpful to assist in paying for the additional costs. I'm also going to add that I did check with our engineer in how they came up with the $3 million price tag. It's always very difficult at this early stage to get a good handle on costs, so it's typical to add a decent contingency, which was done in this case. And also, it is based on similar projects in this area in the previous year or two. So we're using very current data around the costs associated with it. That gives us a bit more confidence in the numbers we're bringing forward. So if we look now, so we've talked a little bit about the environmental and the water, also heard comments about the road design. So I'll observe that currently our design does meet the requirements for grades and alignments associated with it. Given the topography in the area, that was a challenge. I also will say that we also had an opportunity to have our environmental team review the environmental reports and the road design and make comments on that. That assisted us with ensuring that we, as much as possible, utilized existing logging roads and the topography. The only crossing of the stream is occurring at the narrowest point and at a location where there's currently a logging road crossing of it as well. The roads are now located just solely along the south and the east property lines, which ideally would reduce the wildlife conflicts, because those are set apart from a much larger contiguous corridor of land that would provide for potentially for wildlife corridors. And finally, there is the potential for trails within this amenity area. That's quite obvious when you're in this area as well. We were asked to take a look at stormwater management. It is a little early in the process to do definitive, but I can say that there is a commitment on the part of Lita Homes to ensure that we're using low impact development techniques, or LID. And so the features of LID design for stormwater is basically we are going to consider establishing a set of standards for all house construction within the subdivision, the on-site detention for every building or hard surface on each lot would need to be detained, and the goal is to mimic pre-development flow rates. So the release of the stormwater from each lot will equal what it is today. Also, we are proposing to consider the 20% lot coverage requirements in the zone, similar zones like this one, which again limits the building areas, allows us to retain more trees and ground cover, that again reduces runoff and maintain existing flow regime. We are proposing that we would use detention facilities throughout the site. These could include things like bioswales and rain gardens, or something as simple as a rock pit to replenish the groundwater in addition to doing the detention. And proposed stormwater management plan would be developed prior to the subdivision and would be implemented on building by buildings at the building permit stage, because until then we don't really know the specifics of what a future lot owner wants to do with their land. So a couple more slides now to summarize where we're at with this application. So the key environmental protection areas have been identified and they're shown here on this plan. We're putting aside approximately 40% of the land area, or 16 hectares, for protection. The proposed 24-lot option would assist in recovering the water servicing costs. The 20-lot option, so either of these is acceptable. The 20-lot option, if we're servicing by wells, and in that way, as has been pointed out, we're not pressing up against a official community plan amendment related to the additional density. Each lot has adequate building envelopes and meets the minimum amenity lot size area of 2 acres, or 8,000 square meters. And we are ready, and I'm going to hazard to say eager, to move forward on the council site visits and to organize some opportunity for gaining some public input. I will say that that's really important to us, because we've been at this now for over a year, and we really would like the opportunity to have a broader discussion with the community and the other referral agencies before we get too far into any additional changes that need to be made. Finally, the summary here. So for either the 20 or the 24 lot options, each minimum 2 acre parcel will be developed with consideration of ensuring we have a protected amenity area set aside in the plan, ensuring riparian setback areas are met through the SPIAs that have been identified. I'm also going to add that we are appropriate. We have added an additional 5-meter setback to the SPIA for tree protection of any trees that are right along the edge of that boundary. Stormwater design will be provided to guide the required detention for each lot, and we have identified the building envelopes for each lot on the plan, and all of those building envelopes lie outside of the protection areas and are definitely large enough to accommodate any of the development that needs to be put, including future septic, stormwater, and wells if that's the decision. And finally, some consider consideration of recreational opportunities, although I would welcome the opportunity to have a broader discussion about those as well with staff. So at this point, I'll ask if there are any questions for either of us.
Thank you very much, Denise. And I will ask the same thing of the committee. I do have a few questions, both of Catherine and Denise, but
Do you want me to sit down and?
No. Maybe hang out for just one sec. But committee, any?
I think it'd be good to hear from our planner, if you don't mind, just to set the stage.
Okay.
And then respectfully, if you could come back, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Committee, I have a few questions, but I wanted to turn it over to you first. So, if you, Mary Lou?
I have a whole sheet of questions too, but the main question that I wanted to ask of you, thank you for the report, was opening up the OCP is risky. And prior to my experience on council, I was very in favor of opening it up because why not? You know, update it. We're a new, vibrant community, but we've seen from other municipalities, North Saanich and View Royal, for instance, that opening up the OCP can be very risky for the community, interest groups and that kind of thing. If we open up the OCP for this amendment, does that open up the OCP in general? Or is this just opening it up a crack?
I think the easiest way to answer that is that you're opening it up for the topics that council is wanting to debate. And so a bylaw would be prepared based on what council would like to bring forward.
Okay, so it could be restricted to a very narrow window.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Great,
That will,
thanks. Thanks for that clarification.
yeah.
And, yeah, sure, Councillor.
Well, that was my question also, so thank you. But I really appreciate your comprehensive report and all the work you put into it. It was really great, so thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gray, Councillor Donaldson. Maybe one question each to start with, and then we can do a round. But.
Go ahead.
Catherine, thanks for the very comprehensive report. A big help. I wondered, the question I had is about this, if one went with the proposal for wells, and then things got going and on these lots there was insufficient pressure or water from the well site, what happens? Is that lot left alone, or is it merged with other lots, or how does the proponent proceed in that situation?
My understanding is that through a subdivision process, that's when the servicing requirements must be met. And so that would be determined a little bit later. This is really talking about the land use as a whole. Generally, the approving officer would need to have that confirmation in writing before it's signed off for the actual subdivision. So in fact, you could have less than 20 lots if it was found that servicing was not feasible.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the great report as well. I might sneak in two questions, though. The first about the options. So the way I read option one is you would first look at amending section 6.8 of the OCP to make it suitable for this subdivision. So you'd go through that process, and then once you had that down, then you would hear the actual rezoning application. So it's almost like a two-stage process. I think that's correct.
I think what would need to happen is that discussion with council would need to happen regarding what type of amendments you'd be looking at opening up in that amenity area.
Okay.
Like some members of the public had pointed out, there's maybe one amenity development that's happened in the Chosen in the past.
Yeah.
There could be opportunities to amend this section to make it more viable for more amenity rezonings to work in our community. And so that's something that could be discussed, and if that's the approach that you'd like to take, then we could look at more than one line of that section.
Okay, but again, I think we, right now, to do in some ways the minimum you would need to do for this application, you would amend 6.8, and then you would relook at the app, yeah, okay, great, thank you very much. Really quickly, option 2. This is where you talk about amending the OCP land use map to accommodate the increased density. So I think what you're talking about here is you would do, you would delineate the residential area. You call that rural 2, I think, zone it that way. And then you would also delineate the park as well, and you would simply call it open space park. So, and they would be 2 new zones in that area. I think that's what option 2 is about.
Yes, there would be 2 new zones on that land area, but they'd be existing zones that are available in the land use bylaw.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Anyone else? I'm just going to get anyone no further questions for Catherine? Don't go anywhere. We might. Sorry. don't leave the room. We may have a. I'm sorry. Go on. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Catherine. In terms of the idea that you mentioned earlier, I guess then one of the concerns you have is that you're taking a specific application and then making a specific amendment. And the worry that you have, I think appropriately, just to confirm, is that then we'll have other applications exactly the same going, just repeating itself, rather than dealing with the OCP in general.
That's in particular with option 2.
Right.
Yeah, that's because there isn't the amenity policy section to sort of rely on as guardrails. Option 2 doesn't have that.
Right, so you're leaving the guardrails behind for that particular proposal.
Right.
That's great, thanks.
Catherine, sorry, I'm going to be redundant. I just want to clarify the difference between option 1 and option 2 in terms of zones. So I think what would happen with option 1, which is, again, amending the amenity zoning clause in the OCP, that whole area becomes an amenity designation. That's what it's termed as in terms of the zone. Is that correct? Option 1?
Option 1 would amend that section 6.8, which is the policy context, because right now the application is not in alignment with that section to actually make an amenity development.
Yeah.
So that section would need to be amended as part of the rezoning application.
But then once you did that and you went through it, if that was the direction you went, the land itself is then zoned as, it's called an amenity designation. Is that correct, or?
Yes, I would propose bringing forward a mapping amendment, just so that it was very clear that it's an amenity development area aligned with the amenity area in the OCP.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Councillor.
I just had one more. This might be more suitable for the applicants, but there's a whole long list of ecological recommendations. And I was wondering, what can be done to make those recommendations a little firmer rather than just as recommendations.
Through the rezoning report, I don't know if you want to answer that as well, but typically we would work with the applicant to secure anything through a rezoning. We have a bit more flexibility in having conversations and coming up with an agreement that's suitable so that it's meeting the community's expectations. So if the expectations are that we need firmer environmental controls on the site, we can actually put that in a restrictive covenant, and that's something that they would have to agree to. They'd be bound to that, and it would be in perpetuity for any property owners in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawes.
Yes, thank you very much for your report. It's very comprehensive. So in both option 1 and option 2, there's costs that may be incurred. And it might be a little hard to gauge, but approximately how many hours, or how much cost would that be with staff time to do this type of amenity?
As far as the engagement with the community and that sort of thing?
Well, I think we're talking about an amendment to the OCP.
It really depends. The amendment to the OCP would simply be a bylaw amendment. It could be brought forward to committee for consideration, and then it would be up to you to decide how you'd like to engage the community on getting input on that particular amendment. The other way is to talk to the community first and then bring forward a proposed amendment. Really depends. It's a bit of a question mark, and that's why I wanted to raise it with the committee as a question mark, because I don't know exactly how many hours it would involve.
At minimum, though, I'm sensing, Catherine, that it would be at minimum an open house, sorry, not an open house, but a public hearing to amend the OCP.
Certainly, yes.
Okay, great, good question.
And the other question I have is Beckingham Road itself would need to be upgraded, is this correct? To service this? I know the sightlines some residents have brought up a question about the sightlines entering onto and exiting Kangaroo Road. Would this be the responsibility of the district, or would it be the responsibility of the developer?
So currently,
if it's needed.
Yeah. Currently 20 lots are permitted to already be created, and through a subdivision process there would be no upgrades beyond the frontage of the property. It would be just within the property itself, typically. Through rezoning, that can be negotiated a little bit, particularly if there's additional lots. There could be, a little bit more wiggle room, but there'd have to be agreement from the applicant because it's outside of our bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor Little.
Yeah, I agree that the Beckingham goes down. It's really almost like a country lane. Goes down and then circles around and comes to a dead stop where it says private property, and then the property's up above. Evidently there's a culvert right at the entrance to the property, or sorry, the entrance to the property that would need replacement as well, and some infrastructure. Is that the responsibility of the district, or is that the responsibility of the applicant?
Is within the site or outside of the site?
Yeah.
If it's within the site, it would be the responsibility of the applicant. Outside of the site, typically the responsibility of the municipality, except as negotiated if there's room to negotiate with the applicant.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, we would want to go through that referral process out to external agencies, internal discussions with our engineer, and determine what's required, and then have those conversations with the applicant as they're amending and refining their application.
Okay. And the other question, if you don't mind, the only way in and out is through Beckingham. That's correct?
Correct.
So, I just think 20 lots, if you have 2 cars and everybody's moving back and forth at least once every 2 or 3 days, it seems like that road would get a lot of use. So I think the road would need upgrading. I hate to say that, but I think because it's so narrow, especially on when you're going down and turning around. I didn't have a very large vehicle, but it was quite narrow. So I think that's something we need to take into consideration as well. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Questions for Catherine? Doesn't sound like it. And Catherine, thanks very much.
No problem.
And maybe Denise, if you could come back up and hear our questions. And committee, I have a few for Denise, but anyone wants to start? Well, why don't I kick things off and can you talk about how you plan to do the home development in this subdivision? Like, do you know, will LIDA be building the homes? And sorry, maybe this is a question for Dave, but are you committed to building the homes, or are you going to sell the lots and the owners can do what they want to?
Are you able to commit
I
like
can
this?
answer
Yeah, okay,
that. So the way it's set up right now is Lita Homes is committed to do a separate contract with the purchaser of the property, and we are proposing to do a completely net zero community and combine that with some form of carbon neutral construction process. Exactly how that's going to fold out, but they're both in alignment with the provincial direction and the federal direction around environmental protection and energy consumption and all of those things. But
Yeah.
that's a lot of construction of what we do.
Okay. Sorry, one more question. Do you anticipate having any minimum sizes to the homes? And we've seen, I think we're all aware of certain subdivisions where you cannot build a small house. You have to build essentially a big house.
Yeah, I think that would be just through the public consultation of what the public would like to see and a discussion around that. We haven't really kind of backed ourselves into it anywhere yet.
Fair enough. Yeah. Great.
I have a question regarding the provisions that would be in place for such things as the water management. I've heard from residents in the Albert Head region where there was a subdivision there was a mandate for them to put in water management systems. Some of them were never done, causing great problems with other neighbors. How do you, if Lita Homes develops or builds all the houses, do they also build the infrastructure for water management as well, or is that left up to the owner to do after development? I'm just wondering because we have difficulty enforcing because we have low capacity in staff here, so I don't want to take on additional problems.
So my guess is, and Josh might be able to answer this better, but my guess, the design would be created by the civil engineer, and it would get attached as a covenant to the lot, and then the building inspector, when he does the building inspection, would confirm that it's done as per the design plan, right? So that way it can't happen. So I'm kind of shocked that happened. It shouldn't happen. But if we're doing things properly, that should never happen.
Okay.
Yeah, what you want to do is link, what you want to make sure that you're doing is to link the building department, to link the building department with the agreements that are made today. It has to carry forward to the point where someone's buying a lot, they're looking at all of the documentation saying, I understand, I have to do that, I have to do that, I have to do that. Those are the commitments. So it's reflected for that homeowner where they're not purchasing a property and saying, I had no idea, nobody told me. Carrying that forward is typically done through a covenant, which was what Catherine had suggested just now. And that's the best way that I know of doing that. There are other ways to limit, for example, the development on a property. You could do it through zoning and say for this zone, the maximum site coverage would be X. Or the house, would need to meet this requirement or that requirement. These are all different mechanisms or tools that can be used that could be brought forward, as we move along. And one more thing too, it can even go so far as to establish potentially architectural standards or design guidelines, if you will, to deal with those things as well. But from my perspective, the safest and strongest case is made when these things are put on a covenant on the parent parcel. It then goes on to all the lots themselves, and nobody has any excuse at that point to say they don't understand, and it is enforceable by the local government because they're named on the covenant. So, and that could include, the speed protection, the environmental, you'd made a comment about that, all of those things can be written into covenant to provide that assurance to the community, to staff, to future councils and to the future owners and to Lita Homes. Everybody understands what we're doing here. This is what we've agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So covenants are very powerful tools.
Can you, another question? Can you include fencing in that covenant?
I have. I've also done it through the design criteria.
Right, types of fencing,
Yeah.
not huge fencing to not allow any birds or anything in.
Yeah, it could be, or the style of fencing. I've done it also where it would need to be a privacy fencing, so not chain link, but something that gives privacy to adjacent neighbors. These are in more highly urbanized areas, but yeah, that's
hedgerows.
That's done as well. Yeah, and it could be suggestions for hedging and landscaping that could be incorporated into those things as well.
Oh, sorry, Mayor Little. I'll just ask Councillor Johnson. Go ahead.
Yes. So we don't have an option before us here tonight where Lita Homes would be, I guess my question is, would Lita Homes be interested in, instead of 24 houses, 20 for the amenity zoning?
Our original proposal was 20 lots with wells, and that was what was brought before the planning committee last year. It was the suggestion that we extend the water, and additionally, I'm just saying what was said at that meeting. One of the members of the committee actually said, I think it's so important that we consider this. We should also consider additional lots to help the developer cover the costs of doing that extension. So this wasn't our idea, but we're reacting or responding to the comments that we've received. And so what we've done here is brought forward another option, which is the 24 lot option with the water. And we wanted to demonstrate we could make 24 lots work, and that's why we've done it here. This same plan could be scaled back to 20 lots with wells, if that's the thinking behind what we're proposing to do. And so you're right, going above the 20 lots, which is the allowable density, triggers the official community plan change. And then Catherine, I think, did a good job of sort of explaining there are two ways to do that.
Okay, so my question then would be 20 lots with piped water instead of 24.
Yes.
Right, and so...
Say yes. Say yes, and it's easy for everybody.
Well, listen, we're not going to make any decisions here, but I have heard that. I want you to know I heard that. And
you want to be fast, easy, productive? Say yes.
We have heard. I have sat here today and made copious notes, and I heard the comments to that effect, and I recognize that. But any of these comments, we're going to need to take them away and review them with the team. And the other thing I just want to point out too is I really want to hear from the broader community and have the referral, because there might be other things. And to ask us to agree to something and now there's a wall of other stuff coming, this all, from our perspective, we need the more robust review and feedback from the broader group so we can take a look at what everybody's priorities are. And I'm sure there will be others when the referral process takes place. So it's hard for us to make any commitments right now at this point in time, because we're really only seeing a very small part of the total thing. Yeah. And it's important to engage the broader, I personally think it's important to engage the broader community in the comments that we receive here as well. Yeah. And that could be all kinds of things. I attend, meetings where people show up with passion pleas to provide more housing because of the housing crisis. I mean, it can run the gamut of how people see things and how they view things too, for the consideration of everybody. Thank you for letting me have that little.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, thank you for being open to consider.
I do have a question on water, if any.
Let's move to water.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for what seems like a very creative approach to developing this property.
Thank you.
And again, I started the meeting by saying Lita owns this. It is zone rural. There is the possibility of subdividing it. And with that, you work with staff. There's no or very little public input.
Or council.
Or council input especially. So that is an option. But again, there are some limits to what kind of lot coverage you could have.
Correct.
The zoning, but also the riparian setbacks. You've mentioned water and that you seem to have the okay from your consulting engineer or your hydrologist to meet that 3,400 liters a day. But I have to say, I've got some questions with this, and maybe you can help me unpack like the methodology that he used to come to that. So it was pointed out to me that there was 12 wells that were used to model your water, and there's some time lags with when, and I don't know if this is the data, but certainly when they were drilled, and it seems to me the data as well. So one was drilled in 1969. 4 were drilled in the 70s, 3 were drilled in the 1980s, and 3 were drilled in the 1990s. So the question I would have is, if you're basing your assessment of that 3,400 threshold on that information, which is pretty old, I have some questions about that, and particularly in this area where we know that there are changes. And I do hear the residents being very concerned about the health of their wells with the addition of more property. So can you confirm that was it the data from the original time those wells were drilled that's used in that assessment?
I can't now, but certainly we could ask our hydrologist if they can elaborate a bit more on how how they came to the conclusions they did and what the risks of using data from older wells is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And sorry, I think to my mind, one of the implications of that was whatever means I could do, I would want that reassessed based on what the use is today, and even discussion with the nearby neighbors or even working with them to do an assessment. The other thing toward what Councillor Donaldson was saying is we should recognize that 20 lots, 21 lots, 22, 24 that have piped in water, there's a significant value bump, I would say, to those lots versus lots that rely on well water, and especially at a time and in a place where there are more and more challenges to the aquifer. So there's an economics, I think, that you get an immediate lift even if you did 20 lots by having well water. Do recognize there's an economics to getting the water to the property, but
I'm not a realtor, and I just can't
Yeah.
say what that value will be, and
Exactly.
even what it will be in a year or 2 years, or whenever we have,
Yeah.
we're bringing things onto the market. So it's a hard thing,
Mhm.
to predict, but I do understand, the concept potentially is a valid one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The trend would seem to be going toward piped water being very valuable in this area. So, yeah.
I'm just one of the comments that was in one of the letters, proposed potentially, and I'm maybe not using the right language here, but potentially engaging a neutral third party with this expertise to kind of take a look at all of this information and provide feedback to Chosen. I would like the opportunity to review that with Al, if that's possible, with your engineer. I'd like to get their initial thoughts on some of this information as well, because he has a very broad, knowledge in things like this. And so that would be something we could engage in doing, is going and sitting down with him with this data, get his thoughts, and then potentially considering whether it makes sense to bring in a third party to look over not only the costs, but also the feasibility and the hydrology report and the risks. And in the meantime, I can find out from our hydrologist what they consider the risks to be as well in relation to this.
Thanks very much, Marilyn. Sorry, Councillor Gray, have you?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Regarding water, so we do know that aquifer 606 is very fragile and sensitive. That's how it's characterized. It's a low-producing aquifer, and many people, anecdotally and personally, I've had well on our property. We're up higher above this that has run dry when it never has run dry before, early in the season, in June, for instance. And many people on the Arden Road properties have also run dry when they had wells that were really good producing wells. And so now I'm more of a proponent for piped water, I have to say, knowing that there is a cost to the infrastructure. For instance, on the Bond Road on Ash Mountain this last winter, there was a major structure fire. There's no piped water up there. What the fire trucks had to do was to run the trucks up and then run pumper trucks back and forth. This was a major event, and it was winter. If you can only imagine what would happen along Kangaroo Road if this was July, when everything is quite crisp and something was to happen there. So I'm more of a proponent of piped water. Saying that, we know that the water has to come from somewhere. It's not going to come from Aquifer 606. It will come from our overall system somewhere, but not the slow producing sensitive bedrock aquifer 606. And so I'm more of a proponent of piped water now. I'm also not really a proponent of the third-party assessment after an assessment is done by a qualified engineer, because as I understand it, the CRD, if a proposal was brought forward, it would need to have a seal of an engineer. No engineer is going to risk their accreditation by some kind of a dubious report. That to me would be senseless to expose yourself and your career for a development. And so I'm not sure if we would need a third independent, the District of Machosa would need a third party assessment if we have a registered qualified engineer with the seal that would be going through to the CRD. So it is expensive to pipe water. I understand that. It depends on the size of the pipe. It depends on the amount of rock, and you just have to drive up Kangaroo Road to know how much rock there is there. And then, as you said, you used a different word than a pumping station, but we know that I suspect that it would need a pumping station there because of the topography, right?
A booster, yeah.
Yeah, a booster.
Yeah. And that's a big ticket item.
Yes.
By the way. Yeah.
And do you know how much that is? That's like 1 to 2?
I think that was maybe half of the total cost.
Yeah, about half of the total cost.
So about 2 million?
Well, just over $1 million, 1 to 1.5 probably.
1.5 million just for the pump station, the boost station.
Yeah,
and
because
then
the estimate included soft costs, like engineering and that sort of thing. So half isn't necessarily half of the total, but yeah, I think that's what I recall was came in around 100 or $1 million. So
okay,
that's And what's been pointed out too is the fact that with that you get the potential for hydrants and more effective fire suppression as well. So, and going to your comment, maybe there's a value in that to the land because their insurance potentially is low. The future homeowners' insurance is lower if they're within a certain distance of a functioning hydrant. So this is great stuff, by the way. Thank you. And also your own personal, experiences with your well. I've been hearing this a lot of the rural areas that I do work in. One of the things I'm hearing from the well drillers is their response to all of this is they're just drilling. They're not stopping at 100. They're going to 300. And I mean, the cost for that is quite high, but it's to try to ensure that there is that future long term as well. And that wasn't necessarily the thinking in the 70s, 80s, 90s to go that deep with a well. So I'm working on a property right now where their original well was like 60 feet and they ended up with a 300-foot well next to it to bring that in. So, there are other ways to, potentially to address these issues, not for existing homeowners, but in terms of this community and what's required, and obviously there are costs with that too. So.
And then my final comment is that I think that water is going to become our most precious resource. We already know that they would like to have developments, for instance, on Salt Spring Island. They've got the money for housing developments. The limiting factor is water. Yeah. It's an island. We're an island. I think we're headed in that direction with water being at a premium. So this is a big issue. And also, I would like to say we really do need a site visit, absolutely.
Great.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll just break it up into, so we don't have quorum.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, we could just, make a day or two associated and, we can schedule everybody for an hour walkabout yeah, we welcome that, and potentially if there are committee members, various committee members, I don't know, recreational or things like that, that would like to participate, certainly we'd be happy to do that as well. So.
All of us can meet together. We met on site visits all together. We just don't move the decision process along.
Perfect. I'm sure.
So I'm seeing Councillor Epp raise her hand.
Thank you. Well, as someone who's lived on a well for 50 years and never had enough water to have a garden, I can appreciate the value of having piped water. One interesting thing is that when the properties above us when the water line went in up Arden and so on, our well actually got better, which was interesting. But anyway, what I was curious about is how you came to the figure of, I know it cost $3 million, but how you came to the figure of adding 4 lots to recoup the $3 million. I know it's kind of it's just you don't really have an estimate of figures about how much you can sell a lot for, but you must have had some criteria that you worked on, and I'm just curious about that, where the 4 lots came from, if 2 lots would manage to be enough to provide enough to pay for the water. So
I am not aware. I will say though that the 4 extra lots did fit in the area that we wanted, meet the minimum lot size and have the minimum protected buildable areas on each of them. So to some extent, I'm gonna guess that that's the maximum we could do no matter what, and that's what we brought forward. It's easier to take lots off than it is to add them on.
Right.
So we just went with a number that we could fit, given the riparian setback areas and what we could make work within this area. So, but again, it's so difficult. You got all these equations. Costs are constantly going up. What's happening in the real estate market? And those things are just really hard to, at any point in time, say, yeah, that's safe or not safe. So we'd be guessing no matter what we did, right? So would 2 work? I don't know, right? I don't know what the market will be and what the value of these lots will be in 2 years. Yeah, really. You know what I mean? Like, we're all in the same boat, but for the development industry, it's tough. I mean, just the market situation right now with interest rates and difficulty with mortgages and supply chain issues, labor issues, it's just, even the $3 million price tag, the numbers that you would have got 3 years ago are in the garbage, everything is just, so much more. So I'm sorry, I can't kind of answer your question other than to say it depends.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
Councillor Burke, anything?
Yes, I wanted to ask Denise about the what you raised about the third party person working with Al, the engineer. The questions, though, aren't engineering questions that were being asked in the correspondence. They were related more to cost savings with clustering, potential value of sale price uplift with water, and the per lot value. So that's a different question, but that person you would be interested in engaging with as well if we did something like that.
Yeah, and like I said, we aren't going to be able to say what the lots values are going to be, anytime soon. But certainly, we'd be willing to open up to somebody else to scrutinize, and likely to start with Al. And I think that's entirely appropriate. He's a well-qualified individual, and he works for Machosen, so he's going to have that view. I think it'd be entirely appropriate for him to take a closer look at our numbers and see if that the approach that we took to come up with those numbers and what we're doing, if that makes sense from an engineering perspective. I just want to add too that I did bring along some answers. There were some questions about the roads and the intersection and stuff like that. I saw those in the comments, the letters that we received, that I received this afternoon, and I'm prepared to answer some of those detailed questions if there is an interest in that as well. Yeah.
Sure, but before that, anyone else with questions?
Yeah, so I just want to go back to the 20 houses versus 24. The other bonus in Machosen here is we actually allow for suites to be in homes. So that means that could be another group of people using water, whether it's wells or the piped-in water. So that's also a selling feature for the custom homes that Lita does build. So
I'm not sure if suites would be permitted in this zone. Yeah. I'll have to take a look, yeah. I'm not actually sure if they would be permitted even with water, but that would be potentially something that could be considered in light of increasing the value, to recover the cost. So there's a lot of ways to go at that equation, yeah.
Suites are available in all zones in Machosen.
I think the minimum is 2 acres?
Yes, because I live in a 2 acre and they are all allowed to have some form of a suite, detached or attached.
But it has to be 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
So-
well, this would be that then.
Okay. Great. Denise, if you wanted to address some of the questions.
Sure, yeah. So there was one question about site distance at the intersection of Beckingham with Kangaroo. We did actually get that query, actually I think a couple of years ago, or within the last few years. And so we asked a transportation engineer to go and take a look at it, and their response that they came back with was that we would meet the requirements for site distance in both directions with this existing intersection, given the 50-kilometer-an-hour posted speed limit. We are willing to take another look at that, and maybe with a bit more scrutiny, and come back with something more formal to do that. There was also a comment about the culvert, and I think, Lena, I think the culvert is actually down the road a little way. It's not right at the entrance to the property, but it's sort of down Beckingham.
You can see on the map where the creek is flowing to the east.
Yeah.
So it comes on the part where
kind of down.
No. Sorry. Or this is Hewitt Creek here, and Beckingham Road comes like this. So there's a culvert crossing here. There's a tiny little driveway crossing here, culvert, but it's little. But the bigger culvert is on Beckingham Road off the property.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So there was a concern about the age of that culvert and how well it's functioning. And again, this is why we're saying we need the broader referral process and get some more comments related to all of this before we're able to really start making commitments. So there was also a comment around the road is maybe not in great shape right now, and with the truck traffic that would potentially result from not only the subdivision construction but the individual home constructions. I don't know of any local government that doesn't have a rule that if you damage the road, you fix it while it's under construction, while the work is going on, and afterwards, you leave it in good shape. So I'm not nervous that isn't going to be a part of what we're going to do. I think that's an easily enforceable thing by staff, and certainly something we would be willing to provide as well. So, and there was a comment that we hadn't done PERC or septic or this sort of thing. So. Again, where you dig your test pits for your septic depends on where the lot is, has to be distances from lot lines and wells and things like that. So we have already gone out once with the old thing and done the test pits, and the PERC was all, at that point in time, was all good at those locations. So we know we have decent PERC and decent soil cover for a lot of the area, certainly what was being proposed last time, which is quite close to here. So that, to me, that's not a huge issue, but it's not really something we can go out until we have a better handle on where are the lots and where they're going to be. And then, so typically this is something that's associated with the subdivision stage, where you're sort of going in and saying, before we can subdivide, we want to ensure that we have the wells and that they're good producing wells, and before we do the final approval. And we also have to make sure that we have the test pits, and VHA there's a process that you have to follow with them, engage the services of a registered professional wastewater consultant, and then they would do all that work and submit their reports, and that would then feed into when the buyer buys the land. These are the areas that have been set aside for the primary and secondary septic fields. So it's a bit of a complex process, but so we do know we have good perk on the property right now in a lot of the areas where these lots will be, but those test pits might need to be redone given the change in any future changes that we're making. So again, we're eager to have the broader referral process take place so that we get a bigger pool of comments back that we can look into. One more thing I just want to add too, there is a requirement, no matter what, that if you do more than 3 lots, you have to give 5% of the land for park, or 5% park contribution, which would apply here. And clearly we're well over that, but I just wanted to add that as well.
Great. Any further questions? Actually, Councillor first.
I should probably know this, but if you're putting in wells, is the developer responsible for the wells or the homeowner?
It's a way of doing this too. Again, it depends. With some agencies that I work with, they're fine to leave it till later. They'll just take the hydrology report as good enough. I work with other municipalities where you're drilling that well and you have a test. The well driller has to provide test results to demonstrate that they meet the minimum requirement for flows. Yeah.
I was just wondering if that would be a cost, like who, if say pipe water would save the developer the cost of drilling the wells, or
and subtract that, and that is something we're happy to do as well, as if and when we get to looking at the detailed cost for the water extension, that the cost for the well should be deducted from that, because that would have been what they would have spent if the wells were done. Yeah, correct. Yes.
Okay,
I think that was a comment in the letters as well.
Great. Marilyn.
Yeah, I was just, you piqued my interest in talking about trails. And so have you looked at the topography of the land and estimated where the trails could be, or you haven't thought about that? I don't think, actually through you to staff, I don't think this has been referred to our Machosen Environmental Advisory Select Committee or the Parks and Trails Advisory Select Committee. So we definitely need to do that to get their assessment. But have you got any ideas?
Well, the key one is at the northeast corner. That little sort of bump out there. There is a current road right-of-way existing in that corner. And we can go there during site visits and you can see for yourself, but I don't think you're going to get a road connected there. The topography is quite steep at that corner. However, I think because there's already a road right away there, it would be legal for the trail to exist, and that connection could be made to the Goose, I think it is, the Galvin Goose. So that connection is possible for trails to go from that corner in. And you'll see on these diagrams, we've left some corridors through between the lots and all the way around the west side and the north side, to the far corners, to ensure that there is contiguous routes through the site, not just on the road itself, but also within that area. I did take a look at the master plan, the Parks and Recreation master plan, and it is a little old. So, potentially there's newer thinking or modern thinking, and we would certainly welcome the opportunity to have to meet with the committees that are associated with those elements and get their thoughts on all of this as well, but it's hard for us to sort of go in at this stage and sort of say that's where the trail should be, or this is where the trail should be. There are logging roads on the property right now. They seem to be the appropriate location, to put trails potentially if they're outside of the roads themselves as well. So there is some continuity provided through the site and within the site on the roads, etc., for future recreational uses, is for the people that live in this subdivision as well as those outside as well. But the northeast corner is the northeast and southeast corners are the only one where you have a road, dedicated road right away available to utilize. You're not going to another property owner and asking to purchase land.
Okay.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And where in the map is lot 20 that somebody has referred to, which I couldn't.
I think that was from the old version.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Lot 20 was the far west one. It was very close to a sensitive ecosystem area.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, it does work. Okay, let's go back. This was the one we previously presented. So, yeah, so lot 20 is the far left one. That was the first iteration that we did.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just one more. I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but how wide are the corridors between the properties?
I think we need everything around 6 meters.
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Of the trail corridors that we have through between the lots, and that I think everything was a minimum of 6 meters.
So, yeah.
Trail, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So that's 19 feet or 20 feet or so?
18
Yeah.
feet. Yeah, something. Yeah. 18, 19 feet. Yeah. Okay, Denise, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Now,
Thank you.
Any more questions for Catherine? We can probably turn to her if we need to as we go. That's great.
Catherine, I wonder what the process would be then. Say we, I think what's happened here, it's very nice to see what's occurred since the last meeting of the planning committee to this meeting and what the applicants have put forward. And I'm wondering then, they've made a value proposition here about pipe water versus, and 4 lots. And so then we have one of our letters, is suggesting that we have someone take a look at that and check that value proposition. Where would that fit in the process? And if we said, gee, well, we'd like to do that, when does that happen?
I suppose it would depend on whether you'd like that information before you make a decision on this application, or if you're willing to move forward with one of the options, and then you would also, in addition to moving forward with one of those options, maybe add another.
Right, and it could be done before the public get together, if you will.
Yes.
I mean, I think the argument is more or less, have a check the numbers so that we feel comfortable, and the public would then say, yeah, those are reasonable numbers. And I'm not suggesting the 4 isn't correct, but hearing the questions at the table, it's like, gee, would 1 be better, or could 2 work? Do we need it at all? There's all kinds of issues there. And I think the argument in the letter is, if we did do that, then we could move this along possibly quite well with the public, as opposed to hitting a lot of opposition on the question of increased density. So it makes sense to do it prior to a public engagement, it seems to me. But that would fit. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Marilyn.
So could I ask a question of Councillor Gray? Which numbers are you talking about? You're talking about the number of lots, or you're talking about the numbers to provide the piped-in water, or the infrastructure, the amenities, the contingencies? What numbers? What are you talking about? Numbers?
Right. So what we're hearing is that there's a cost between, the way I'm interpreting it might be different than what's all here, is that there's a $3 million cost to put in the pipe water. And we see a number of, there's a position taken by a number of people that that's a good thing to do. And then the applicant has said, well, we can do that, but to get back that $3 million, we would like to have approval to increase the density by 4 lots. And so the question is $3 million worth 4 lots? So the numbers that you'd look at would be the cost saving, and as written in the letter, the cost saving to the developer associated with cluster development and 60% of the lot area. So there's some cost savings there that you could look at. There's a potential value of the uplift that Councillor Shukum's talking about, because you have pipe water. And then there's the mention of the houses are a little bit more, so increase the value of the lot. There's also a question of increasing the value of the lot for having fire hydrants. Then there's the the idea of a pretty cool place to live in terms of the location and the approach that the applicant's taken in terms of the ecology. So is there an uplift associated with that? So in the end, what it is you have the developer, the applicant with a proposal, and we have ourselves on the other side, and we just want to check and see does that number is 4 houses the right number, and if we have an independent person look at it, that provides a bit of how should I say, help to everybody to understand. Oh, it wasn't one side or the other who did this. We got somebody else to come in and take a look. And they said, yeah, that's reasonable. Or they said, not so reasonable. And that was my question to Denise, to say we would be okay to work with somebody, because it may well be that working together, I'm taking a very positive view of they may say, well, that actually works for us too. Now that we've narrowed it down, done a little bit more work. As Denise was saying, it's a tricky game. Real estate prices, what's the value here and there. But I think from my perspective, it's a sensible enough, because it helps us come to agreement as opposed to taking up polar positions. And it may be that, if I may, Bev says, let's go, no increase in from public participation, no increase in lots. It could turn out that works for everybody, but maybe it doesn't. And so you have to take a look at it. And I'm not suggesting that the proposal would work at that level, but it would help us all maybe come to an accord that makes sense and is defensible in the public and gives a positive view of the situation.
Okay. So I think, thanks for that, because I was wondering what numbers you were, and so you were according to Morgan Yates's letter,
yeah.
and so I just wanted to clarify for the committee, and correct me if I'm wrong, the applicant will be able to get a figure for the piped-in water, a more concrete figure from CRD. They won't be able to say exactly what that is, because they won't know all contingency, but they will be able to firm up that number and affirm that number of $3 million for the infrastructure for the piped water would be necessary. And then I guess what you're saying is then the applicant would say, well, in order for us to recoup those costs, we would need to increase the lots by 4. And that's what they've done. And so I guess that was based on fair market value, what you think you can, in 2 years' time, what you could sell those homes for, what it would cost, all of your costs associated with the development. I guess the applicant has heard by now that we would like to stay as close to 20 as possible, except for I won't say we, I understand it costs money to do the infrastructure for piped water, for fire hazard, for insurance purposes, for the benefit of the community. I'm more in favor of piped water. I know that comes at a cost. So if you could come down in terms of your requirements for 24 lots, that would be really beneficial and more palatable, I think, to the community. That would be my sense. But I do like the creativity of the plan. I like that you've done an environmental assessment of it. And we do have one amenity zoning that is Deer Park Trail that really did turn out quite nicely. And the trail system, it's connected. It's not just a trail through the lots that don't go anywhere. It provides connectivity not only for wildlife but also for horses and members of the community. So I like that as well. So thank you.
Catherine, you can sit down if you're
Okay.
good. Well, I have a question too. My inclination is toward piped water. It's toward amenity zoning. But given that we're here representing a community whose values are low density and an effort to protect as much either farmland or wildland as we can, it is toward lowering the density as much as we can with a new subdivision like this. Just to echo what Councillor Gray was saying, if we were to do that and work on a process like that, the bonus and benefit to the developer is that we could if council was accepting of what we work toward with lowering the density, we would be able to be, it sounds to me like an ally in moving that process along. So the potential is there. I'm not saying it will happen, but the potential is there. So I'm just trying to think about what is the mechanism for doing something like that. Is it discussion with staff? Is it engaging a third party? Yeah, and I mean I think the obvious point is maybe a discussion with staff. I'm not sure where the third party might fit in at this stage. Although so Denise, any thoughts, or Dave, any thoughts?
I had thought that this is going to be the nub, of the issue related to it, and I appreciate that everybody is struggling, what's enough and what's too much. It's always going to be a difficult thing to kind of pin it down, because even if we say 3 million a day, we don't know that's what it's going to be in 6 months or a year, and these things often have that kind of a timeline associated with them. By the time, because just the rezoning approval is just the first stage, there's so much more that has to happen, and all of that can add to the time. So I think we'd be chasing a moving ball if we're trying to come up with something concrete. But I do hear very clearly that we should take another look at all of this and see if there isn't a way that number could be reduced. So clearly I hear that. And I really would welcome the opportunity to have a discussion with Al, just, as an engineer representing the Chosen, and get his thoughts on sort of this concept and this idea, and, what we think. And I think what you're suggesting, what I like, is, when you bring forward a unified approach, things are easier. It's always, and so maybe there is a little back and forth that happens here in order for that. One word of warning I will give you, though, is that every month extra that this whole process takes, is more cost, holding costs and things like that. So, our hope is that we can move swiftly through it, and that at some point, as soon as possible, I'm sorry I'm saying it again, that we have a more robust review process has taken place, so that we can look at the whole thing, because there may be other things that we're not thinking about right now and that we should be, which are equally or even more important than this and have to be given consideration. So I think, in fairness to everybody, I welcome the opportunity to have that referral process take place, to have further discussions with staff. We can come back at that point and bring that information here. We could exchange that information in a variety of ways. We'd be happy to host a public open house ourselves at our own expense, and maybe with the assistance in terms of the invitations. The members of council could certainly attend, or staff if they wish to, and that would provide us with a bit more community feedback at that stage as well. So I think those are all sort of things in the back of my mind that we could be churning through in the next few months and come back with a clearer picture.
Thanks, Stace. Councillor Green.
Yeah, maybe I'm just realizing as you're talking that perhaps we don't need to hold up that process for that discussion. The point being that a discussion can occur, and then we, as we're talking about it to public, we're saying, look, we're looking at this question we intend to resolve in terms of the appropriate trade. That would meet the approval of both parties.
Yeah.
So,
and at the end of the day,
and that's the commitment made at the public that we're working on that
that's
together.
right. And I think, my thought is we'll feel better about our own, Lita Holmes will feel better about that process once we've had a chance to engage with the broader community and the other referral agencies to consider what their thoughts are. We can go back and take a look at our costs again with the whole thing, all of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So
great. I'm getting lots of questions, including from the audience. I don't think I'm going to take questions from the audience. For the reason is I believe that we are going to have an opportunity in the future for more questions. There's still a whole discussion that has to take place at the committee level. So I'm going to keep it at the council table for now. So, Councillor Al.
Yeah, well, excuse me. Well, it seems to me that rather than asking for, more investigation in whatever area right now, that probably our next step should be asking Leah to have this public, a public meeting, and then see what comes of that. First of all, rather than, going through a whole bunch more steps and then having the public, we might as well just do it right away. I mean, personally, I obviously would like to see as few lots as possible. I really believe in having piped water, and I also really believe in protecting our aquifer, but also protecting as much habitat for the wildlife and the trees and the vegetation as we possibly can in Metchosin.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. I'm actually very appreciative of the amount of work that Lita Holmes and their team have put into this. There's a lot of thought. Certainly they listened to the past council on this, and this new map and set up with taking into consideration all the riparian, the wetlands. There are several neighbors downstream of Hewitt Creek that have been asking a lot of questions. Some of them have water licenses on that. So protecting that water course, that watershed is key. Eventually that does go into Bilston Creek, as you may know. So these are all things that our community has been sharing with us that is something we really do need to listen to. And this team has done an amazing job in bringing this force to us. And certainly we have a little bit more work to do. So I look forward to that.
Mayor,
yeah, so I was wondering if we could turn to staff and ask about the timeline and how we should be proceeding. We've definitely heard from 4 of the 5 of us that that we would prefer piped water, I think. Is that what I heard? I'm not sure. Councillor Gray?
Yes, I'm leaning in that direction as well. So okay. I think it's like option 1, option 2. Isn't
okay,
it?
So we have 5 of the 5 that are leaning towards piped water. And so I definitely think we need a site visit, the public hearing, a meeting with our consultant engineer, our planner, Councillor Shukin, and what did I say? The engineer, the planner, Councillor Shukin, as well as engagement with our 2 advisory boards. And then there may be necessary to have a second public hearing, I don't know. And can we talk about the timeline, how we're going to proceed?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Hold on 1 sec, sorry, Catherine, Councillor.
Yeah. And is it public hearings or open house? Open house, I think. Yeah, okay, great.
So on page 9 of the agenda is the process is laid out. Mm-hmm. And so once we have council's direction to proceed with one of the options, we're hoping that there'll be support for the applicant to host an open house where they can start obtaining some more feedback on whichever option is we're proceeding with. We'd like the opportunity to refer the application out, so we'll just have to refine what that looks like. With the OCP amendment, we'll need to look at that a little bit closer before it gets referred out to agencies, because we need to know what we're changing in the OCP. So I think that's maybe where the question mark is about how you'd like to obtain public feedback as we proceed through that.
Okay. Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead. I do have some comments I wanted to just make to the committee, but sorry, please.
Okay. And then, once that referral takes place, the applicant would then be in the position to receive all of that information, fill in any gaps in information that the referral agencies have asked for, and then they would refine the application to come forward for committee consideration for first and second reading.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. Give me 2 minutes with the committee, sure. and we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to summarize so let's close off the discussion with the proponents and Catherine for right now. I just want to summarize where I think we're at. I believe that consensus right now is with option 1 and option 2. And right now, without maybe being definitive about it, the option we actually don't like as much is option 3, which is recommended. So we're looking toward, and basically, to me, piped water means either option 1 or option 2. It means an amendment to the OCP. Simple as that. And I think that's where council is going. The question, of course, for us is that we want to keep the density as low as possible. That's the big thing. And what if that's the consensus, I think it'd be interesting to move to some sort of next step without maybe committing to an OCP review that is going in this direction, or like specific to option 1 or option 2. I'm wondering if there's room for LIDA to do the public engagement that they want, for us to do a site visit, possibly for me asked to have a look at this, like even on the 24 lot configuration, with an understanding that we want to reduce the density as much as we can. So take it to sort of a step 1A as opposed to like the next move, the next big move, which is sort of aligned with amending the OCP. So Catherine, I guess that's my question to you. Any issues with taking a baby step forward, but then giving Lita Homes, the go-ahead from us to do the public engagement, to do an open house?
I think that's fine. It's really up to the applicant as far as if that timeline is, following what they'd like to proceed. I know that they're anxious to speak with the public so that they can get that information and feed it into this refined plan. So I think that would be a good baby step forward.
Okay.
So, Catherine, what I'm always concerned about is the unintended consequences of the opening up the OCP. So if, are there any, I'm asking it's not a rhetorical, but not hypothetical either question, are there any other lands of this size in Metchosin that that by us amending the OCP, it would have unintended consequences for that particular land to be able to follow suit?
In the context of option 1 or option 2?
Option 2, yeah, well, option 1 or option 2.
I wouldn't be able to say that with a definitive answer. I think, amending the OCP under option 1 is probably the most clear way when applicants or landowners come into the office to ask these questions. It gives staff the clearest, policy framework. In terms of option 2, the amendment to the OCP isn't as large. It's not as, we're not getting into the text really with option 2, but what we are doing is not following that policy that council has typically followed for the last number of decades. And I think that one would provide a bit less, without amending it or providing that policy framework, that one would provide us with a bit of ambiguity as to how to respond to potential applicants without knowing from you how you'd like us to do that.
So just clarification, so we would need to amend policy PL 400.30 and then also amend the OCP at 6.8, right?
I think that doing both of those options with option 1 would be really helpful. Option 2 would just be amending that policy. The actual amendment would just be a mapping change to the OCP, but it's really just being able to communicate that to the public and to potential applicants in the future without that policy being followed in a consistent way. We just need to know under what circumstances, increasing density would be supported in the community, and that's a big question.
Yeah. Councillor Gray, go ahead.
I think I need to think about 1 and 2 and
go
away.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. Councillor Gray, and I have a comment after you. So.
Yeah, and I think that's right. It's sort of a balancing between the two. So I would, when I'm thinking about it, and like you, would like to talk about it more as we move this along rather than decide today, but I would say option 1 is the floodgate option. In other words, you're opening the gate, you make the decision, and then any other development can follow the pattern here. Whereas option 2, it seems to me, we're saying in this specific instance, we're going to do this. It still creates the people asking, could we do it, but it doesn't make the decision beforehand. And I feel a little bit like, in the analogy of the baby steps, well, option 2 is the baby step. It's not as risky in the sense of making a major change. And we've got a pretty interesting proposal here. The next one might not be so interesting. And yet we've opened the door, with option one. But that's a discussion we can have more of. I'm not wanting to be definitive of, but I think that's the kind of distinction between the two that I'm seeing.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great point about option two. I'm not as worried if we decided to amend 6.8 because ultimately it is a rezoning and the community and council would get it. Ultimately it's council's decision if they proceed with it. So it's not just we wouldn't look at it like an empty field as a significant community amenity normally. But again, there's risks. So thanks for clarifying the difference between those two. Okay, so what I would like to, I'm trying to think about what the actions here. And the other thing so I ran through where I think we're at. Pipe water, support for some type of rezoning that allows us to protect the wildland area, working with the developers on appropriate density. But where to go next, whether it's option one or option two, I don't feel like we're ready to do that tonight. But what I also think we want to do is open the door, for further dialogue with Lita Homes, but also maybe allowing Lita Homes to go out and talk to others as well. And I don't know what kind of resolution or anything. Sorry, Councillor.
I'll try this, that I move that we ask staff and Lita Homes to work together to set up an open house for the public consideration.
Do I have a seconder for that? Awesome. Councillor Gray? Yeah. Councillor Gray will second for discussion. And discussion. I will just chip in. I think I like the motion. I'm not going to throw it out right now, but I would almost consider an amendment just simply to say that the developers continue to work with staff on the density question, and we continue to assess options for the appropriate rezoning mechanism for this. And that is considered option one or option two in my mind. So how does that sound? So we have the open house, we have the discussions going underway, and our wheels keep turning in terms of what approach. And we'll get public input and all that as well. But,
sure, that's fine.
Okay. So any thoughts? I'll move that amendment.
So there was a motion on the table because it was first and seconded, and now you would like to do an amendment to that.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Your amendment, which would include, let's go over it again, just so everybody's clear, a site visit, up a open house. We would encourage that, or you want to take the open house out of that piece?
No. I think
that's the first.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then the meetings with staff to talk about density, and that would be with the engineer, yourself, and the planner, and then referral to the two different advisory groups, or not?
I didn't add that in.
Okay. Just those three then.
Yeah.
The site visit, the public open house, and then the working with staff, and then the original motion.
Yeah. Okay. I think what the amendment was. Tina, did you catch it? Okay, you didn't catch it. That's okay.
The main motion is an open house, so that's in the main motion. We're talking about something
The
else.
amendment was just to continue to work with staff.
Okay, so the amendment is 3 prongs. The developer will continue to work with staff and looking at the density question. The council will look at doing a site visit. And
one and two, we'll keep the wheels turning.
And we will the committee will continue to consider the best ways of a zoning amendment. Is it safe to say does that capture everything? Options 1 and 2.
Zoning and OCP amendment.
Zoning and OCP amendment. We'll continue to keep that open. That would be the amendment. Anyone else want to chip in on this?
And the visit, or sort of the meeting with the engineer, the planner, and yourself. That's what you're including in the staff?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so moved. And do I have a second?
I seconded it already.
Okay, Councillor Gray has seconded that. You good to that?
So that's on the amendment to the motion?
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah. And we've seconded now. Discussion on the motion, or on the amendment. Hearing no discussion, I will call the question on the amendment to the motion. All in favor? And none opposed. Great. Okay, so to the main motion, which includes everything that we've talked about in the last 2 minutes here, which I can't. But it begins with Councillor Gray's suggestion that the developers move toward, or Councillor, that they are unable to move toward an open house.
That they work with staff to set up an open house.
Thank you very much. Exactly. With all the amendments. Okay, any discussion?
I was just wondering how the metrics of that, how the comments will be captured, and how that will be collated and brought forth to this council or this committee.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we would probably, that would be up to the developers for sure. But one of the things that I would measure them on is how fully they capture those comments. And I probably would be at the meeting and kind of have an understanding of what the vibe is. So I would leave that totally up to the developers. But knowing that we will want that feedback for sure. So. Any other comments? And we're voting on the main motion. Okay, hearing no further comments, I will call the question. All in favor of the motion? Thank you very much. None opposed. Great. I think we have done our duty tonight. We have a sense of where we're at and what our kind of views are right now, and we have some wheels turning in terms of connecting the developers with staff and them understanding where our interests are, and we're looking forward to a site visit. So, and with that, hearing no further comments from the committee, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Councillor Gray. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.